What's going on, duelists? It's your boy Nick, bringing you on the channel for the very first time is my branded deck profile for the post Cyberstorm Access set. Now, branded is a deck that I personally really enjoy and I've wanted to bring to the channel for a while. I helped build this deck with a close friend of mine. The person who I built this with was actually the person who piloted the Umi deck, which if you've been watching my videos on my channel, you've seen that Umi deck in action before. And he wanted to try and build a branded deck. So I agreed to help him, obviously, and we slowly started collecting all the cards needed for it. Because branded isn't necessarily budget, especially if you want to play branded in its most competitive form. But we have officially all the cards we need now, and I couldn't be happier to bring you this deck list to the channel and show you guys what some of the spice that we're working with. So with that being said, welcome. My name is Nick. We do Yu-Gi-Oh content mainly focused around rogue and casual decks alike. If those are things that you're interested in, then I highly encourage you subscribe to the channel, like the video. I post non-stop, usually weekly, and I cover a lot of really cool things that most Yu-Gi-Tubers don't focus on. So again, smash that like button, subscribe. I'm working my way to 1,000 subs. I cannot get there without your help. And with that being said, we're going to dive right in. This is a 44 card main deck list of branded. So we're diving headfirst into the monsters as we usually do. And as you can see here, we are starting things off with 3 copies of Fallen of Albaz. Now, I know that most builds only play like 2. Some are on 3. Personally, I feel like 3 is the correct choice. Just because sometimes you just need that extra copy of Albaz, you know, in deck to resolve branded fusion and whatnot. And running 2, just like, if the duel turns into a grind, there have been scenarios where you just don't have an Albaz target anymore. So I feel like playing 3 is the correct ratio, at least for this build. Like, if you're trying to run a clean 40 card list, then I could see the argument for cutting Albaz from 3 to 2. But since you're running 44 cards, I feel that 3 Albaz is just correct in this scenario. So you start off with 3 of him. Obviously, he's the bread and butter of the whole lore. Everything is based off of him and him alone. This guy's kind of wild, and he definitely got into some things. So moving on beyond that, we are playing our normal summon of choice in this deck, and that is 3 copies of Keeper of Dragon Magic. Now, we've been back and forth on this card. Originally, you have to understand that when we set out to build this deck, we wanted it to be a Predaplant branded list, because at the time we felt that Predaplant was a nice budget way to make branded playable without having to invest in like the money cards like Cartesias and Quests and everything. But after doing testing, we found that the branded Predaplant variant was a little inconsistent. It played just too many like bricks and cards you just didn't really want to draw necessarily. And we struggled a lot trying to like test the deck and make really decent end boards that were worth committing to. So we ended up cutting down on the Predaplant lineup and just sucked it up and bought the cards we needed. And as a result, Keeper became a mainstay in this list because as a normal summon, this card is quite insane. Upon normal or special summon, you discard a card to add a polymerization normal spell or a fusion normal spell from the deck to your hand. Keeper allows you to search cards like Instant Fusion, which is insane, or allows you to search cards like Fusion Deployment, because it is a normal spell that does have fusion in the name, which a lot of people tend to overlook. So Keeper is basically a pseudo starter for you, because obviously Albaz is great, but as a starter, if you're going first, not really, because your opponent doesn't have a board that you can fuse away with. So you know, even though we max out on 3 Albaz, it's not a card you necessarily want to see in your opening hand. However, if you do see it, it's not a problem. It's just not a card you want to normal summon necessarily. Keeper gets you a lot more value as a normal summon in the deck, while also having a secondary effect that allows you to reveal a fusion monster in your extra deck, and then special summon one of the named materials listed on that card from your graveyard back to your field and face down defense position. So through the Keeper line, we can actually make cards like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon before even committing to our branded fusion line. That way we can try to play around through stuff like Ash Blossom, since Ash has been branded's Achilles heel since the beginning of time. So 3 copies to Keeper. Like I said, a very good normal summon in this deck. Then we follow that up with 2 copies of Aluber. We're just playing 2 copies and not 3, just because we didn't want to make the deck too bloated. We're at 44 cards currently, and I didn't want to make the deck any bigger than that. So we're just on the 2 copies of Aluber. Could you play 3? Absolutely. But so far, with the 2 copies we have, I think that that's more than enough. Realistically, like, you have so many different ways to get to cards like Branded Fusion that relying on Aluber solely for that isn't really required, at least with this version. But you do still play 2 of it. Obviously, Aluber is nuts. If it's normal or special, you get to add a branded spell trap from your deck to your hand. And then also it's got a secondary effect where if a face-up fusion monster you control is destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect while the Eluber's in grave, you can target an effect monster the opponent controls, special the Eluber from your grave, and then negate that monster's effects, which is really cool. So 2 copies of Eluber, the Jester of Despia. Then we move on, we're playing 2 copies of Tri-Brigade Mercurier in this list. We decided to bump this card up from 1 to 2, just because it's not actually a terrible target to send off cards like Branded Fusion, being that it is a dark, and if you can banish it, it also allows you to search for a monster from deck to hand that mentions Albaz in its text, or that is Fallen of Albaz. So we run 2 Mercurier, and as a hand trap, it's really nice since we do, you can search this card off of Branded Lost once you establish an Albaz fusion, and you just have like a monster negate for free. Then we, moving on, we play 1 copy of Cartesia and 1 copy of Guiding Quem, probably the 2 most expensive cards in this main deck. Blazing Cartesia is really, really strong. Some builds do play 2 of her. However, I feel like as a one-of, it's fine. Can you play 2? Sure, but again, we've been doing a lot of testing with this deck, and we feel that the 1 Cartesia has been more than enough. What she allows you to do is she can special summon herself from the hand if there's a Fallen of Albaz on the field or in the graveyard, which is really nice. In addition to that, she can quick effect fusion summon into a level 8 or higher fusion monster using materials from your field or your hand. So she's pretty much like a polymerization on legs. Then also she's got a very annoying effect where during the end phase, if a fusion monster was sent to the graveyard this turn, she can add herself from the grave back to the hand. So she just keeps coming back over and over again, which is why I feel that having the 1 copy is more than enough since it's a card that just self-recycles constantly. Then we have the Guiding Quem. She's brand new out of Cyberstorm Access. She's always treated as a Despia and a Dogmatica card, which means that even though we only play the 2 Eluber, technically she's also a Despia monster, so she can be summoned off of cards like Branded Opening, which is really nice. And when she's normal or special summon, she lets you Foolish Burial any card, not monster, but any card that mentions Fallen of Albaz in its text, which is insane. And then if a card or cards leaves the extra deck, whether like you send something from the extra deck to grave for cost, or an extra deck monster is summoned, that all counts as a monster leaving the extra deck. Quem triggers to target any monster in the grave that's either Albaz or a monster that mentions it from our graveyard and allows us to special summon it. So Quem is a very wonderful addition to this deck. She allows like the ceiling to become much higher than what it previously was. So these 2 cards are well worth the investment if you are trying to play this deck. I know that they're not really budget, but like I said, if you do want to play Branded and it's more optimized form, you are going to need at least 1 copy of each of these, unfortunately. But moving on, 1 Despian Tragedy, really good target to fuse with, because if it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect or banished, it allows you to search for a Despia monster from the deck to your hand, which is really nice. So just another way to get to Eluber, hence why playing 2 Eluber isn't so terrible. And then also, you can banish the Tragedy from grave to target a branded spell trap in your graveyard and set it to your field, which is also really nice as well. Then we're playing 1 copy of Albion the Shrouded. If there's anything that Branded players are going to misplay, it's probably this guy because his effect is very confusing. Long story short, if he's in your hand, you send a Branded spell or trap from your deck to the graveyard. Then you place this card from your hand on the bottom of the deck, and if this card was in the hand and that effect was used, you draw a card. He can do the same thing from the graveyard, where he can dump a Branded spell trap, but if he does that, you don't get the draw. So, like, and I've seen a lot of people misplay that, so I just wanted to bring that up. But 1 copy of Albion is more than enough. It's a hard once per turn on its effects. Keep in mind, though, that while it's on the field or in the graveyard, it is treated as another copy of Albaz. So we are technically playing 4, which is pretty cool. Then we just play the 1 Ad Libitum of Despia. We can search this through our combos. And during our opponent's turn, if we go Branded in red or Branded Banishment, and we use Ad Libitum as part of that fusion material, we can take any fusion monster that's either in our grave or banished and special summon it back to our board. So Ad Libitum is a very nice card to just kind of play on the opponent's turn. And then we have a pretty interesting Bestial package. We're on 1 Magnamut, 1 Saronir, followed by the 1 Bestial Lubellion, which again is probably the 3rd most expensive card in this list. So again, I do apologize for those of you looking for a budget alternative. This is not that. It started off as one, but like I said, we just figured go hard or go home, so we ended up just buying everything we needed, and this is our Bestial package. Lubellion is an amazing light target to send off of cards like Branded Fusion. The Lubellion can be discarded from hand to search any Bestial from deck to hand, and then I'm sure all of you know how Bestials work. They banish a light or dark, so they pretty much like big-ass DD Crows that special themselves. Magnum searches any dragon from deck or graveyard to hand at end phase. Sarenair, when sent to grave, allows you to Foolish Burial, a branded spell trap, which is insane. So this 3-card package just increases the ceiling and overall consistency of the deck tenfold. Also, when you factor in the fact that the Lubellion can place a continuous branded spell or trap from deck to your field, so you can just straight up like place cards like Branded Lost from deck to your board off Lubellion. There's other targets as well, which we'll get into when we get to the spells and traps, but these 3 cards are invaluable in this particular list, in my opinion, and are very, very strong. Then, like I said, we ventured out initially playing a Predaplant line, but we decided to cut down on the Predaplant cards just for consistency reasons. So we mainly just used the Predaplants as a way to turbo out Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, and all we need for that is 1 copy of Bufalicola and 1 copy of Predaplant Darlingtonia Cobra. A Cobra is a hard garnet, so you really don't want to draw it. But if you do, it's not the end of the world. But that's really all you need, is just the 3 Keeper, 1 Bufalicola, 1 Cobra, and then the Instant Fusion, which we'll get into once we get to the spells. But Bufalicola, if you activate him in the Pendulum Scale, he's pretty much a polymerization. He lets you fusion summon into any dark fusion using materials from your hand or your field, which is really cool. And then the Darlingtonia Cobra, if it's special summoned by the effect of Predaplant monster specifically, she allows you to add any polymerization spell or fusion spell card from deck to hand. So Cobra can also let you search for cards like Fusion Deployment, Branded Fusion, as well as Super Polymerization, which is just really powerful. So just 1 of each of those. Then we play 1 copy of Dark Magician in the main board, just because we need it, obviously, to make Dragoon. So pretty self-explanatory there. And then to round out the monster lineup, we are on a playset of Radion, the multi-dimensional kaiju. So we're not running hand traps in this build, and as a result, I felt like we just needed that extra push for going second. So I figured, why not just play a playset of the Dark Kaiju? It's a dark target to send off Branded Fusion if needed. Also, it's an Allure of Darkness target, which we are mainboarding in this list. Again, we'll get to that when we cover the spells, but I just thought it was a decent card to play. If we lose the die roll, go second. At least if we have access to a Kaiju, going second doesn't seem so terrible. You know, we can get rid of stuff like, you know, the Purely Noir, you know, against the Purely matchup. You know, getting rid of that unaffected monster is very strong with the Kaiju. Just getting rid of anything that you overall just don't want to deal with. So Kaijus are always good for that. So that rounds out the monster count. Now we're going to jump into the spell cards, where we play triple copies of Branded Fusion, the heart and soul of the deck, obviously. You have to max out on this and just pray that it does not get ashed when you do. If it resolves, you're probably winning that game. That's all I'm going to say. Very, very powerful fusion spell, allowing you to use material from deck, which is just nuts. Then we round that out with triple copies of Branded Opening. This is obviously just a very strong extender for the deck, allowing you to discard any card, not for cost, but for effect. Like, that's another thing that a lot of people misplay on. If the opponent does decide to ash this for some reason, you don't discard a card. You only discard if the effect actually resolves, which is important. But it allows you to either add to hand or special summon in defense position a Despia monster from deck. So those are cards like Aluber, obviously, so we technically have multiple ways to get to Aluber, despite us only playing 2. Or we can also get to the Guiding Quem, who's also treated as a Despia monster as well. So opening's nice. Also, opening is a really neat effect where if a fusion monster you control would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish this card from grave instead. So just help insulating your board from like board breakers, things like Raigeki, Lightning Storm, and whatnot. Then we also play triple copies of Fusion Deployment. Very strong card and extender in this deck. You can use Fusion Deployment to special summon cards like Albaz from deck, special summon Blazing Cartesia from deck, or even special summon cards like Dark Magician from deck if you needed to do that. So Fusion Deployment is mandatory in this list, I believe, as a 3 of, just as a nice extender. Then we are playing 2 copies of Allure of Darkness just for added draw power, and we just banish a dark. So if we banish cards like Tragedy or Mercurier, we get beneficial effects off of those cards in addition to the draw 2. Plus Allure of Darkness isn't even once per turn, so I think it's a pretty decent card in this particular list. And like I said, we are mainboarding the Dark Kaiju. So if we are going first and we do have the Kaiju, if we have Allure, the Kaiju can just be a Allure target to banish, and we just draw 2 cards for free. So something to keep in mind. Then we're playing 1 copy of Branded Lost, 1 Branded Regained, followed by 1 Branded in Red. As our one of spells for the Branded. Branded in Red is nice to set off Fusion Albion. During the end phase, this allows us to play it during the opponent's turn, which is really, really cool. And then Regained and Lost are amazing continuous spells that the Bestial Lubellion can just place from our deck face up to our spell and trap zone. And obviously Lost is just an insane card, preventing your opponent from responding to the activations of your fusion effects, as well as preventing the opponent from activating cards when a fusion summon is performed, which is very powerful. Then to round out some of our power spells, we're on 1 instant fusion, 1 Foolish Burial, and the 1 Called by the Grave, again, to try and stop that pesky Ash Blossom from negating the effect of our branded fusion. Instant fusion, can't believe this card is still legal. I know it is limited, but this card, in my opinion, is ban-worthy. It's just so powerful. I mean, think about like everything it did during tier format. Like, that was just insane. Then Foolish is obviously very strong as well, just being able to dump any monster you need from the main deck to grave. If you do send a card like Tragedy, Tragedy does trigger its effect to search, given that it was sent to grave off a card effect, so keep that in mind, which is really nice. And then we're going to round out the 44 card list with our trap lineup, and we are just playing 3 traps in the main deck. 1 Branded Banishment, 1 Etude of the Branded, followed by 1 Branded Retribution. Banishment and Retribution are pretty much mainstays in a lot of lists, so I'm not going to elaborate too much on those. But Etude is a spicy card that we're choosing to run in this particular list. Like I said, this main deck is 44 cards. Etude is a newer continuous trap that just came out in Cyberstorm Access, and this card acts as a pseudo floodgate. Basically, what happens is it has an effect that allows you to like synchro summon during either player's turn, but we're not playing any synchros in this deck, so we don't use it for that. What we mainly use this card for is its floodgate-like effect, where if any monsters that your opponent uses as material for a ritual, a fusion, a synchro, or link summon are banished when they would be sent to grave. So it's kind of like a pseudo macrocosmos of sorts. It does not cover Xyz summoning, because when you Xyz summon, the material doesn't go to grave, it just becomes material below the Xyz monster. So against like Xyz decks, obviously you side this out because it's not relevant, but against other decks, like if you're establishing a Mirror Jade, Dragoon, it's Depelia, and then you back it up with like a pseudo macro effect, there's a lot of decks that just can't play through that. So like this card is very powerful, and keep in mind it can be placed face up in your spell trap zone by the effect of the Bestial Lubellion as well. So that rounds out the main board. Like I said, it's 44 cards. Now we're going to jump in to the extra deck, which is chock full of fusion monsters, as usual. We're on 2 copies of Mirror Jade. The Heart and Soul, probably one of the best boss monsters I've read in recent memory. Very powerful card. Banishes, non-target banishes monsters as a quick effect, and the cost is you send a fusion that mentions Albaz to grave, which like isn't even a cost, because every fusion you send gives you a plus at the end phase. This card is just insane. Also, if it's leaves the field by an opponent's card, it just nukes their board as well. Like, it's just, this card almost does too much in my opinion. It's just really, really strong for no reason. So 2 Mirror Jades. Then we're on 2 copies of Albion the Branded Dragon. This is what you usually make off of your branded fusion. It requires Albaz and a light monster. And then when it's fusion summoned, you can fusion summon a level 8 or lower fusion from your extra deck by banishing the material listed on that fusion from your hand, your field, and or your graveyard. And then if this card, during the end phase, if it was sent to the graveyard, it allows you to set a branded spell trap or add it to hand directly from your deck. So 2 copies of Albion. Then you play the 1 Lubellion, the Searing Dragon. This card requires Albaz and a Dark. Upon its fusion summon, you discard a card, and you can fusion summon by shuffling material listed on it back into your deck from among the cards on your hand, your field, graveyard, or banished, which is very, very strong. However, he does not have a graveyard effect. So if you send this from like deck to the grave for Mirror Jade's cost or something, it doesn't actually do anything there, which is why we play the 2 Albion and the 1 Lubellion, because Lubellion is a card you want to fuse into, not use as a potential dump target. So something to keep in mind. Then we play brand new out of Cyberstorm Access, 1 Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. This card is very, very powerful, requiring Albaz and any light spellcaster as material. It cannot be used as fusion material, so in the mirror match, your opponent cannot fuse this away with cards like Albaz. Not to mention, this card cannot be targeted by your opponent's card effects, which makes it that much more difficult to deal with. In addition to that, as a quick effect during the opponent's turn, you can special summon up to 2 monsters from your graveyard, 1 to your side of the field, 1 to the opponent's side of the field. That effect is, like, low-key pretty broken, because there's a lot of silly things you can do with this card, and I think it's very unexplored, at least as of right now. So 1 copy of Albion the Sanctifier. Also, it just looks incredible, so you just definitely want to run that. Then you play the 1 Titaniclad, the Ash Dragon. This card comes up, helps push for OTKs to close out duels. Also, it's a very easy Albaz target to fuse into. Like if you're using Albaz's super poly-like effect, assuming you're like trying to go second and break a board, or assuming you're trying to like, you know, turn 3 and you're just trying to push for game, because he requires Albaz plus any monster with 2500 or more attack. Since its fusion requirement is a stat-based requirement, there's literally almost nothing you can't fuse away unless the card is like unaffected, for example. So Titaniclad does come up a lot. In addition to that, he's unaffected by monsters special summoned from the extra deck during the turn he's summoned, which makes him very difficult to remove. And if that wasn't crazy enough, when he's sent to the graveyard during the end phase, he allows you to either add to hand or special summon a Fallen of Albaz or a Dogmatica monster. Now that doesn't seem important, but when you realize that Guiding Quem is also always treated as a Dogmatica card, Titaniclad can grab Quem from the deck and summon it during the end phase, which is really, really strong. So 1 copy of Titaniclad. Then to round out the Albaz fusions, we play 1 copy of Windworm, the Striking Dragon, excuse me. Very powerful. Requires Albaz plus a Beast, Beast Warrior, or a Wing Beast. So usually to go into this, you're using Albaz and a Mercourier. And this is the only Albaz fusion that actually has a negation attached to it. When a Fusion, Synchro Exceeds, or Link monster's effect is activated, quick effect, you can negate that effect. Then you can return 1 monster on the field back to the hand. That bounce to hand is non-targeting, which is very cool. And then out of the graveyard, during your opponent's turn, while this card's in the grave as a quick effect, you get to target Fallen of Albaz in your grave and either special summon the Rindworm, assuming it was summoned properly already, or you special summon the Albaz by banishing the other appropriate target, which is pretty nice. So 1 Rindworm, I think, deserves a main extra deck slot. Then, of course, you're on the 1 Grand Guggenal, the Dust Dragon. This is what we usually summon off our Cartesia. And upon its fusion summon, it allows you to dump a level 6 or higher light or dark monster from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard. Very, very strong. It also has another effect where if your opponent activates a monster effect that would special summon another monster, we can banish this card from our field or graveyard, and we get to cheat out a Despian monster from our extra deck or a Dogmatica monster, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Despia monster from our extra deck or a Dogmatica monster from our main deck. Keep in mind that we can also summon Quem off of this, or what we're usually summoning off of it is our copy of Despian Quiritus. We just summon this for free, and this pretty much blanks our opponent's field. Quiritus is very powerful, making it so that all of their monsters become 0 attack if they're not level 8 or higher fusions. And then when Quiritus leaves the field, it allows us to special summon either an Albaz or a Despia monster from deck as well, which is very powerful. So 1 of each of those. Then to round out, we play 1 Masquerade, the Tax Dragon, is what it's often called. Just your opponent's got to pay 600 for everything that they do. It's very annoying. Then we play 1 copy of Predaplant Ambulomedes, followed by 1 Dragostapelia, and to round out the Predaplant package is the 1 Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Again, we get into this card through the Keeper of Dragon magic line, and using, Keeper to search Instant Fusion, which gets us to Ambulomedes. Ambulomedes allows us to grab Bufalicola. Ambulomedes tribute itself to summon the Cobra. Cobra searches Branded Fusion. You can kind of see exactly where we're going from that, and all that leads into Dragoon, which is very nice, usually before our 5th summon. And then obviously Dragostapelia is just a generic fusion monster we can make easily in this deck with cards like Branded in red or Branded Banishment, allowing us to place another negate outfield. And then to round out the last card in the extra deck, 1 Guardian Chimera. Again, just a very powerful card to fuse on during the opponent's turn, usually through cards like Branded in red. So that rounds out the extra deck and the main. Now we'll just jump to the side real quick. We side a playset of Droll and Lockbird. Droll is a card that's going to be heavily played this format because the best decks in the format pretty much get cooked by it. So expect to see Droll at a lot of deck lists. We choose to side Droll in this deck just because, not every deck loses to Droll necessarily. So if we come across a deck that does play into Droll hard, then post game 1 we side into Drolls obviously as our hand trap of choice. Then we are on the 1 copy of the Druisworm in the side, just as an additional Bestial for decks like Mathmech that do play lights and darks. We can side into another Bestial monster to give us more interaction against them out of their graveyard, which is nice. So the Druisworm is always a good card. Then for going second, we play a playset of Dark Ruler No Mores, followed by 1 Super Poly. Super Poly, we can search it in this deck, so we just play it as a 1 of, but your opponent can't respond to it, obviously, and neither can they respond to Dark Ruler, at least with monster effects. So these are just very powerful board-breaking cards that guarantee that, whatever the opponent established, we're pretty much going to plow right through it. Then for our back row matchup, matchups, 1 Duster, followed by triple Evenly Matched. Again, Evenly Matched doesn't have to address, like, negate boards. It can also go against, like, decks like Labyrinth or Eldritch that like to set 5 pass type stuff. Evenly Matched can just cook a lot of different strategies. So for going second, it can, you know, be used as backer removal, which I think a lot of people tend to forget. Then for going first, we played 2 copies of D-Barrier. I don't understand why this card is still legal. This card is insane, and a lot of decks just auto-lose to it. And then for the last slot in the side is 1 copy of Branded Beast. In the event that the Etude of the Branded Wii main deck does not come up against the matchup we're playing, then we can side out the Etude for the copy of Beast, and it just gives us a more usable trap that we can place on field off the effect of the Bestial Lubellion. So that's going to round out the sideboard, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this deck profile. Like I said, this is my take on Branded post Cyberstorm Access. And definitely be on the lookout for a combo tutorial test hand video for this deck, and possibly even some live duel videos showcasing this deck in action. But with that being said, guys, this is Nick signing out. Thank you all so much for all of your continued support. Again, if you're watching this and haven't subscribed, subscribe. There's almost no reason not to. I'm going to continue bringing you guys really amazing content. Like the video as well and comment down below on what you guys thought. Thanks again. Peace.